Good morning, Bitcoins. We're live once more from the Baltic Honeybadger Conference in Riga, Latvia. We're joined by Peter Todd, who loves to correct me, and Max. How's it going, Peter?
You're wrong already.
Of course, I should have used his full name. No one identifies himself simply as Peter Todd. There's much more to that. So last time we talked, Peter, we were in Prague. We'd just gotten back from Breaking Bitcoin, where you told us of all the dangers of space pirates mining Bitcoin in space with solar panels and all the problems we'd have trying to synchronize the blockchain to other planets. We might have to make a Mars coin. Bitcoin might not be okay on Mars. A problem for Elon Musk, maybe. But we're with Peter Todd today. So how's it going?
You know, I'm very disappointed at the rate of progress on Elon Musk's Mars missions because all of my concerns are basically entirely theoretical. And I don't like being an academic.
No, we need to test that. We need to put it into action and science, and that's what Elon will do. And of course, when you get there, Elon coin will be your only way to transact. And if you disagree with him how much air or how much water or food you should have, you'll find yourself outside breathing the Elon air, which isn't set to be developed yet. He still wants to nuke the ice caps and develop terraform Mars and all that. It sounds great. I'll let him go first. Earth is good enough for me.
Well, to be clear, I mean, I'm really against ICOs normally. I think they're a stupid idea. You know, I could go on for this for ages. But if they fund a Mars mission, I'll make an exception and support it.
A Mars mission, maybe a telescope or two. I could support that. But you and Max were having an interesting conversation that, of course, we wish we filmed. So we're going to totally recreate that, and it's going to be just as good. So let's start out. Max, you were talking about open timestamps. And, of course, I worked in the legal field, and I know how important it is to have a notary come in and to timestamp your project. And theorized about these ideas and talked about things like storing your files on other hard drives and having this universal timestamp system. And when I saw Bitcoin, that's one of the things I thought is that, hey, it's a universal timestamp system. All the notaries are going out of business. But what else did you guys talk about other than the fate of the notaries?
Well, the question that I was always asking, block space is really, really precious, right? It's a scarce resource and it's a really valuable resource. So should we waste block space just to time random shit? And I
like my I got food cooking, I got some popcorn I'm gonna make. I want every one of my popcorn transactions in the blockchain. Obviously, how often does he eat popcorn? Does he eat it every time he watches a movie or only sometimes?
I mean, there's a certain baby BTC, and I may have seen a certain schedule of baby BTC's feedings and various other things at the other end going back to the beginning of baby BTC's life. So I really think we should blockchain that.
But obviously, we're going to need a blockchain for that, if not an ICO.
Yeah. But, we can do this stuff in a scalable way. Like, open timestamps is really about Merkle trees.
Well, I think the baby's going to scale naturally. I don't have to be involved in that.
Yeah, but I mean, the question with baby scaling is how much are we going to scale, right? Like, going from like 5 kilos to 90 is impressive, but it's not that impressive.
We're going to need a bigger baby.
Well, but the question is a 2x year useful, or should we know 2x as well with babies?
I think after like year 18, if it's 2x per year, there's something really wrong.
It's going to be a big baby. We're going to need a bigger scale. But we should get serious and go back to open timestamps and what you were talking about earlier. Max has this idea that we could eliminate time and that we wouldn't have to bother with time zones, and it's 5 o'clock here and 8 o'clock there, and I never know where I am. But Max, can we eliminate time? Can we switch to block time?
Well, look at this. We do not have the international consensus on what the current time is, right? We have time zones. These are annoying. We do have international consensus on what the current block is because we have proof of work. So I was like, well, let's use this, right? Let's just say, okay, we're going to meet in 20 blocks and we're going to have a nice little 2-block conversation. Why not?
Are you talking about geography or are you talking about blocks? Because I'm confused. It sounds like a map.
Well, we don't need a map in that sense because the current block is the same everywhere.
So Peter, would it work? Can we switch to block time?
Well, the thing with like block time is for Bitcoin's consensus to work, you need a notion of what time it is because you have to go adjust difficulty. And the problem with this is, well, we also need to be in consensus because that's one of the root sources of consensus. You know, one form of consensus is the fact that we all live in the same universe, and the total amount of entropy in our local area is, you know, roughly the same, and thus I can't just go pull entropy out of a hat. But we also need to know what time it is. So imagine in our post-apocalyptic future, where we're all in our underground bunkers, using our Bitcoin,
using our Bitcoin.
Yes, of course.
Naturally,
yeah. You know, and it's actually a real problem, because you could go give me a blockchain, and then you could go claim that the time is something other than what he thinks the time is. And it's not like I can just look out the window and look at the sun and go and, you know, mark off the days in my Bitcoin hodler calendar, which all Bitcoin hodlers should have to make
all good Bitcoiners.
Yeah, you know, because you gotta know what time it is. But if you're in your underground bunker, what source of time do you have other than time someone told you and a local clock that you ran? Like, this is actually a very real problem, because it's kind of hard to come to a consensus. It's much easier to come to consensus when we just have the sun peering down on us. So I think it would be really helpful if the sun didn't explode.
Well, we don't know if that would be a good thing, right? I do think that we should maybe...
I think it's good that the sun doesn't explode. Let's not, go there.
Yeah. I think we have consensus that it's a good thing. Yeah.
The sun is good.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to forget that consensus. We should try it out.
Typical libertarians. What would happen if we blew up the sun? Oh, it'd be better off. I could leave. I don't need the sun. I'll go either way.
I mean, like, this is an example where libertarianism fails. You know, because market forces in a monopoly situation are really problematic. You know, we have a monopoly on being a giant ball in the sky that's burning at, you know, 6,000 Kelvin. And, you know, it's just hard to go put a market price on that when there's only one provider. But space travel could fix this problem, because when we get to pick and choose who our suns are.
We need competition in suns. We need anarchy in suns. We need a much more of that. Absolutely. Yes.
And of course, the other problem is, what if Bitcoin was falling into a black hole and it starts to get to the event horizon? And how do I know where my 10-minute blocks are if you're deeper into the black hole than I am? I'm trying to send Bitcoin to or from you.
Well, I mean, really, like, that represents an error bound on our knowledge of time. And since we need time to come to consensus, we're just going to have to increase the block interval. You know, it really depends, like, on how deep down the event horizon, time dilation, whatever thing. I watched Interstellar once.
We're ready now.
You know, and if I remember correctly, in Interstellar, because they had the high gravity planet near the orbit of the black hole or something, and their Bitcoin miners were acting up. And then you had the big wave, I think, of I think there was maybe like Ethereum or something coming in. You know, and because, you know, then they couldn't go sync with the guy up in space. You know, like there's...
And they're mad because their blocks aren't there, and they need their payment for that Bitcoin money, Yeah,
it was a massive reorg when they finally got back to the station. And their nodes learned about the fact that 75 years of blocks had already progressed.
In minutes, you get that kind of data, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think what we need is switch from, like, maybe a blockchain to a block DAG. And then in the event that they'd never double spent anything, and at least you could reconcile those two versions together, you know. Also, like, base 3 would be good. I think IOTA's working on that.
Well, and if you can't trust people who are falling into a black hole, who can you trust now, really? But Max, we should go back to a serious question about open timestamps. It is a real project that Peter works on, and it's not just to wipe out the notaries, right?
Well, I mean, first of all, like, the idea of notaries, well, what does a notary actually do?
Yeah, they carry around a stamp, yeah.
Yeah, but when do they use the stamp?
Only when you pay them.
And also it's supposed to be when they think you're not under duress and, you know, you are who you are and so on. You know, I can't replace a notary with some bullshit piece of software. You know,
good news for the notaries.
Yeah, like, part of a notary is to determine intent. You know, when I'm notarizing something, they want to know, did I really intend to do that, or I'm just really drunk right now?
But right now, the notary just writes down the time in their little book, and they keep their little book. You're going to replace that with a superior system?
Exactly, yeah. No, we should get both. We should get notaries using open timestamps with digital signatures in a blockchain with my other project, Proof Marshal.
And is there going to be an ICO?
Fuck you.
That seems about appropriate. So what are you working on at Proof Marshal? How does that work with open timestamps?
Well, so what open timestamps does is it shows something exists in the past. But what it doesn't show is the non-existence of other things. And, easy example where that matters is, all right, so let's suppose I decide to go and timestamp a commitment to think, I think you're a really swell guy, and I think you're going to be president in the future.
That's a good bet.
Yeah. What I could have done is timestamped every other combination for every single micro celebrity in all of Bitcoin.
Micro, come on. Who you calling micro? I'm macro here.
Careful, I'll say nano celebrity.
I'm getting smaller.
And then reveal the one that was most convenient when you do, or maybe he actually becomes president. But what we want then, for that to be a more valid commitment, is for me to go say, well, these are the full set of commitments I'm making. This is all my guesses for who's going to become president, and sort of prove by the very fact that they're all committed in the same place that I didn't try to have other ones. Or, your more traditional example would be, well, I'm buying a house. I go give you the title deed. It's signed, et cetera, et cetera. It's got a timestamp on it. It looks all official stuff. How do you know I didn't sell the house to someone else? How do you know the non-existence of a similar record? Well, a blockchain does this. Well, proof marshal is ultimately about being able to create data structures where that blockchain might then be committed by another blockchain and then another one, maybe ultimately back to Bitcoin. So you can go from your one true source of consensus, drill down to different consensus layers built on top of it or under it in this physical analogy.
However you do your physical analogies is fine with you.
Yeah. Back to the one topic you have. And, he may not care about my house sale, but he does care about Bitcoin. So we can still communicate that consensus between each other. And then when he does decide to eventually buy a house, he can get the rest of the data. Well, what does proof marshal do? It automates the process of getting that data. You know that to convince him that you've sold him your house, you need to run some function that'll verify this chunk of that data. And you run it on your computer. The proof marshal library figures out, well, what data did that function actually need to access? Then you take that data, serialize it up, send it over the wire. He deserializes on his computer, and the proof marshal library reruns that computation. It returns true in both cases, and we're good to go.
Well, but how can you prove that you do not have a second set of data in a separate proof set?
So this gets to the idea of a single-use seal, which is, the way open timestamps is structured is effectively that your path back to Bitcoin could be rooted in Bitcoin anywhere, right? All it's proving is that there is a path from that message to a Bitcoin block header, and there's no way to go in the other direction, right? So there could be many different paths, and open timestamps doesn't try to prevent that. In proof marshal, you would say, well, rather than just showing that this somehow got committed in some block, we're going to use an abstraction called a single-use seal. And it's kind of like the physical analogy is like the seals on shipping containers. They're numbered. The numbers should be globally unique. I go call you up and say, hey, I want to go and buy some stuff from wherever you live. And, you go put in a shipping container and you tell me what number I expect to go see on the seal. Well, when I get it off in Canada, if the number is the same, the seal hasn't been opened, nothing else being tampered with, I know that whatever was in that container is the same. Well, if you had a digital equivalent, a digital construct that was globally unique, and you could magically seal it over something, over another message, you would then be able to go achieve uniqueness and consensus. Well, what's something that can't be spent twice? Well, all right, maybe not last week, but...
I was going to say virginity, but, it's all the same, yeah.
There's many different views on that one. But, a Bitcoin's not supposed to be spent twice. A Bitcoin transaction output's globally unique. And when you spend it, you can construct your transaction to commit uniquely to the next bit of data. Well, that'll be the thing in proof marshal that lets you build these globally unique data structures. You do it in other ways, too. I mean, obviously, you could just go trust that guy because he looks trustworthy and he promises never sign anything twice. Exactly. And there'll be options like that in proof marshal, but I think the most secure one will likely end up being building on Bitcoin. Of course, the next question, getting back to your obsession about scaling and cheapness, well, what are we going to do when there's 10 million houses being sold every second? Well, you can add another level of indirection. You can make a blockchain that publishes these signatures sealing these seals and then commit to that blockchain in Bitcoin. So now you have one true record of all the seals. And it's the one true record because Bitcoin makes it one true record. And that's just done with a few transactions. And now you can have an infinite number of seals in that database. And then you can extract parts of that. Well, of course, how do you make all that happen? More Merkle trees. It's the solution to all life's problems, more Merkle trees.
They used to say it was turtles all the way down, but now it's Merkle trees all the way down.
And they also used to say that money does not grow on trees. Well, actually it does. So
Yeah, absolutely.
It just grows on Merkle trees. They didn't have the specific one right.
So okay, that's really interesting, but the question would be this blockchain that keeps all the housing records. How is that being secured? Because proof of work only works with an intrinsic token, and it doesn't have like the external factor.
But it is being secured with Bitcoin. Remember, we defined the valid secondary chain as being the one that corresponds to commitments made through single-use seals implemented with Bitcoin transaction outputs. So essentially you're following a chain of Bitcoin transactions, not entirely unlike a colored coin, that then commits to a different data structure that is now piggybacking on top of Bitcoin's proof of work. And the great thing is, you don't need to change Bitcoin protocol for this. It has no idea that this even exists. You know, this is undetectable unless someone gives you the data proving, well, what these transactions are actually for.
So you're putting a bunch of Bitcoin transactions in the Bitcoin blockchain that kind of link to other transactions. Are you putting a lot of data in there? Is it like Factum, or is it a small link, something like that?
I mean, potentially it can be as little as essentially zero data because you can use clever elliptic curve cryptography tricks to commit to data in a signature. Signed a contract is one term that's being used to go describe this. And once you do that, well, there's nothing. They look like normal Bitcoin transactions. You know, yes, you had to make a transaction to do this, but you only got to go do one. And the only limit to your scalability there is, well, who the heck's going to actually do these transactions, right? That's a centralized choke point. But at least it could be my centralized choke point. And for that matter, like suppose you're a big real estate buyer. You're doing hundreds of house buys a day. Well, you could run your own chain, and you can prove to me that you haven't double spent any of this data, even though I didn't trust you to run the chain. Because once it's linked to Bitcoin, it's not about trusting you. It's the math is there, the data is there. It proves that whatever you did was valid. You know, you may not trust me to do that for you because I might screw up, I might lose the data, you know, I might put you in a position where you no longer can sell your house.
Yeah, or my hundreds of houses.
Yeah, but if you do it yourself, I mean, do you trust yourself?
Most of the time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Well, that sounds like a great way to buy and sell houses and to notarize documents. What else do you think could be useful for? Do you see it being like an industry usage for lawyers, or is it more of like a normal person would use it, or is it a specialized class of, you know, digital notaries, something like that?
I mean, the thing with blockchains is, you know, well, people often have this sort of meme of you don't need a blockchain for that. I'd actually argue the opposite. It's that basically anything you can go slap a blockchain on, it'll be a little better. You know, like modern file systems, as an example, like ButterFS, if you actually look at the details how they work, they have most of the stuff for a blockchain inside. You know, ButterFS has a state at the very top, and you can go drill down on what's essentially Merkle trees all the way down to your actual file. Well, the purpose of a blockchain is that you and I can agree on a data set. So in ButterFS, if I want to send you a copy of my file system, that's the same thing. You know, it might not be precisely a linear chain of blocks, but, you know, these concepts are very similar. Git's another example. You know, I have Git source code. I want to give you a copy of that Git source code. You know what hash should be your top commit. Well, once you agree with me on that, you can just tell your Git client to drill down to get all the missing parts. And Git actually, recent versions have the ability to work with repos where parts of them are missing. So you might do a checkout, which is only, say, the first few recent versions, and then later fill it to get the rest of the data.
That's interesting. You mentioned directory structures. I remember one of the first programs I used to visualize the directory structures in DOS was actually called Xtree. So there it is again, Merkle trees and roots and directories, and just thinking of it that way is a nice way, I think, to think of it as a metaphor.
So once you have done the timestamp, do you still need to retain control over the private key to prove ownership of that or control of the private key again in the future?
Yeah, I mean, generally you would, because most of these types of protocols, if you're going to change a state later, how are you going to change the state without resorting to some human intervention thing? You're going to do this with crypto. On the other hand, it can mean that for older states where, say, private keys being lost or so on, you can still verify that they happened the way they should have happened.
If I lose my key, do I lose my house?
Depending on what kind of legal system you have around it, yes. Now, I suspect in reality, these things won't get implemented that way. They'll be implemented sort of a soft way where most of the time we expect the crypto to give the right answer. And then we have overrides. Much the same way as that if you go lose your title documents in any reasonable jurisdiction, there's a way to get that back. You don't lose your land just because you lost a piece of paper. You might lose a lot of time and money paying lawyers to fix this problem, but you will probably get your land back.
Well, yeah, that is really interesting, Todd. And the question would be now, you've worked on that for a long time, right? And is this your only focus right now, or are you working on some other stuff in Bitcoin as well?
It might have taken less time if I wasn't also doing consulting for various other clients at the same time. Or for that matter, giving talks or sitting on niche crypto-related podcasts. It's... Plus, I mean, apparently I'm just not that great of a programmer, and it's actually surprisingly difficult to write code that kind of encapsulates this. So, you're working at many levels of abstraction. Because we're talking about figuring out what data a program accessed, you're doing very unusual things like wrapping pointers and, wrapping data structures and having data structures that represent other data. It's just, it's a big mess. Like right now I'm working with Rust for this, and had I started, say, 5 years ago, Rust probably wouldn't be in a state where I could be doing what I'm doing. In fact, my latest redesign of it, and as a kind of incrementing to a better design, well, the support for it was only enabled like a few months ago. So, it is at kind of the bleeding edge, and it probably will take longer than I would like to admit, but, 2 weeks.
Well, sure, and there's nothing wrong with being a consultant. As Dogbert often said, I like to be a consultant because I can con and insult people. So I'm sure you're great at that, Peter. And more for Max.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this ICO of Open Timestamp, and I do hope that you prove the start of the ICO with the Open Timestamp itself.
Yeah, I want some of that early dirty money in the pre-mine. I want to be one of those guys this time. This time.
For the record, all Open Timestamps, Proof Marshal, whatever ICOs, we already established it will only happen on Mars. Go fund Mars-related venturing. Less than that, and I don't think it's worth getting into that. But for Mars, I'll do an ICO.
Let's send Peter Todd to Mars. You can donate at the QR code below, and we'll send Peter to Mars. But thank you so much, Peter, for talking to us today. Where can people learn more about Open Timestamps and the rest of your work?
Well, if you go to opentimestamps.org or petertodd.org, we've got plenty of articles up.
Well, that sounds great, and everyone can check that out. And thanks so much for joining us. Maybe we'll do this again in Prague, but only if you can write some more speeches about space pirates mining Bitcoin with solar panels, which is really all I'm into. I was into Bitcoin before, but now it's all space pirates mining Bitcoin with solar panels. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.